The Supreme Court's 6-3 decision this week to strike down New York's century-old gun law was, quote, probably the most significant expansion of gun rights from the Supreme Court in the country's history. That's according to our next guest, Michael Waldman, the author of The Second Amendment, a biography, which was cited in Justice Stephen Breyer's dissent. The decision stripped local officials of broad authority to deny permits to gun owners who want to carry weapons outside of their home for almost any reason. The ruling is also set to nullify laws in a handful of other states that have similarly strong concealed carry licensing laws. Joining me now is Michael Waldman, president of the Brennan Center for Justice. Michael, good to see you. Do you believe this decision is actually bigger than Heller, the last major Second Amendment Supreme Court decision from the court? And if so, why is that?
Well, I think it likely will be, because Heller was the very first time the Supreme Court ever said that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to gun ownership. It was only in 2008, it was recent, but it spoke about protecting hearth and home. This, of course, strikes down New York's law, and as a New Yorker, I'm not thrilled about the many more guns that will be carried in a crowded place. When the Second Amendment was ratified, there were 33,000 people living in New York. Now there are 8.8 million. But the implications and why I think it's such a big deal go well beyond this particular law. What the Supreme Court said, what Justice Clarence Thomas said, is you can't balance the individual right against public safety, against protecting against violence and crime. You can only look at, quote, history and tradition. And what this means is that the NRA and other gun rights advocates are going to be able to go into court and challenge hundreds of gun laws that have been upheld by the courts and say you did it wrong. The Supreme Court says you need to look back and find out about what they did with the muskets and what they were doing way back then. And it's a big onslaught coming of attacks on gun laws.
Yeah, so that kind of begs the question, do you see other gun regulations also at risk at this point?
Yes, not just laws about carrying concealed weapons, but all the other things that have been upheld since Heller by dozens and dozens and dozens of federal judges, state judges, Republican and Democratic appointed judges that said, yeah, it's an individual right, but society also has rights. 90% of gun laws have been upheld in the last dozen years or so. Those are all at risk. And it is, like with the abortion case, an evidence of the way the current supermajority on the Supreme Court kind of very selectively picks through the historical record looking for evidence rather than asking what we ought to be doing now as a society.
As we saw with Clarence Thomas's invitation to for other challenges to come in the privacy space, whether it's Roe, Obergefell, et cetera, do you think that this New York case serves as a challenge for those to bring lawsuits in the future?
I think so. It really tells all these judges you did it wrong. It tells the NRA, which is bankrupt and a husk of itself, but nevertheless gets a do-over on these laws. What's striking is the notion, when you read the opinion, there's just no mention of public safety today, of the real conditions of Americans today. Justice Alito, in his concurrence, chides Justice Breyer, for bringing up the mass shootings and the gun violence like it's kind of impolite to do it, like special pleading on behalf of these gun victims. Unfortunately, that kind of thing is a signal to people to come and challenge these laws. It also makes it more complicated for states and cities and the federal government to know what kinds of laws will be constitutional. It's a moment where we just saw the first bipartisan agreement on gun legislation in 3 decades. I don't think that's at risk, but in some senses, the country has had a real awakening and a coming together on some of these gun issues on the one hand, and at the same moment, the Supreme Court has lurched in a very different direction.
You anticipated my next question about the law that was recently signed by President Biden. You don't see that at risk, but is that because it's not as threatening to the gun community, or why is there less risk with that law as signed by the president?
Well, mostly it's not about regulation of guns as much as funding for mental health and things like that, although certainly issues like red flag laws, which say that somebody who has mental health, violent tendencies, or domestic violence or other things can have their guns taken away, you will see people saying, oh, that violates their sacred right to keep and bear arms. But generally speaking, the way the law was written, it's less about gun regulation than about investing in other things. But look, it was certainly constitutional a week ago. I think it's constitutional now, but they have to spend some time looking at it to make sure.